Recovering from narcissistic abuse can be very painful and sometimes traumatic and even dangerous. Most of us would probably do just about anything to avoid repeating another narcissistic relationship, but many of us unfortunately will repeat a similar type of relationship, sometimes several times. In today's video, I want to talk about what we can do to protect ourselves from narcissists in the future. Welcome to Looking Behind the Mirror, where we explore narcissism and take our lives back as we make sense out of nonsense. As a quick disclaimer, everything I say is based on my opinions and my personal experiences. I'm not a professional, and if you're really struggling, I encourage you to seek professional help. I am providing links below for you. I first want to say that there's no magic bullet here. There's no magic sign or phrase that you can look out for. No matter how educated, no matter how experienced a person might be, there is nobody that can say they are 100% guaranteed from ever falling for a narcissist again. But to me, protecting yourself from narcissists really means learning to see the signs before it's too late. Learning when to pull away from somebody before you're in too deep, before you're dependent on them for certain things. Maybe learning what it looks like to get taken advantage of in the first place before we're so deep into the relationship that we're completely under the control of this person. I believe that while you can't always avoid narcissists 100%, you can learn to distance yourself from them before it's too late, or before distancing yourself from them just costs you too much to do. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. What do you look out for? How do you know when somebody is a narcissist or when somebody is going to become abusive? An analogy I'm going to use in this video is that of a rainstorm. Let's say that you're outside camping and you have all your food out on the table and you feel a raindrop, just one raindrop, right? Most of us can probably relate to this. That one raindrop gets your attention, like, uh-oh, is it gonna rain? Should I put all my stuff away? Should I take cover? Is a downpour about to come and ruin all my stuff? And most of us will maybe wait for another raindrop, right? But our attention is piqued. We know that that one raindrop means something and that we shouldn't just ignore it. We don't have a crystal ball to tell us if it's going to turn into a torrential downpour, but we know that that's a possibility. Now, just like this rainstorm that is potentially coming, abusive relationships don't start out as torrential downpours. They don't start out as what we think abuse looks like. You know, we have this picture in our head, or at least I did, that maybe we've seen on TV of these extreme examples of what abuse looks like. And so if we're in an abusive relationship, they don't start out that way, or they very rarely do, right? Just like a rainstorm very rarely goes from a bright sunny sky to a torrential downpour in 2 seconds. You usually get a little bit of a warning. Same thing with abusive relationships. You usually get a little bit of a warning, enough to get out. But if you don't recognize the warning, if you don't realize that that one raindrop means something, then you won't know to pay attention and look out and then make decisions about whether or not it's time to pack your stuff up and get out of there. If you've never been in a rainstorm and you don't understand how they start out, you might not realize the significance of that one raindrop or those first couple raindrops, right? If nobody ever tells you what that means, you have to learn it the hard way. And this can be especially difficult if you've gone to a lot of trouble. You know, you're out camping and you've set up all your food and you've put everything out and it took a lot of work to get everything ready. And if you're not even sure if this is going to be a torrential downpour, you really don't want to put all your stuff away. You're really excited about all this, right? And what if somebody that you trust is sitting there telling you, oh no, it's no big deal. Oh no, that happens all the time. It's not gonna rain. Now, what do these first few raindrops look like in an abusive relationship? They usually look like a few small digs or just little insults, maybe a backhanded compliment. It's really small little things that maybe many of us don't realize are actually really important signs to pay attention to. But I think what makes this even more difficult to recognize, to see, is that many of us, when we see these first little signs, these first little raindrops, because of maybe how we've been raised or what we've been taught, or maybe what the person we're with is telling us, we are made to think that we're the one causing those raindrops, that we are in control of them, and that if we just change what we're doing, we can stop it from getting worse. And the worse and worse it gets, the more and more rain that comes down, we continue to blame ourselves. We continue to think that we're causing it. And so we don't take cover. We don't protect our things. We just sit there and try to stop it. We just sit there and try to change what we're doing because we're listening to somebody that is taking advantage of what we don't know and what we don't understand. So what we really need to do to be able to protect ourselves from narcissists and abusive relationships in the future is to not only recognize what those first raindrops look like, but to fully understand that they are not caused by us, that we didn't do anything to deserve that little dig, that little insult, that backhanded compliment. So in this video, I'm going to talk about certain beliefs and perceptions that can cause us to take responsibility for those little raindrops, or to not realize what they mean, instead of taking responsibility for getting ourselves away from them, from protecting ourselves from them. The first thing that we really need to understand, which might be the hardest thing to hear, so I'm just going to start off with what I think is the hardest thing to hear, and that is to accept people for who they are. That doesn't mean that what people do has to be acceptable, that we have to be okay with what they're doing. But we have to accept that we can't change people, that when somebody says something mean and thoughtless to us, we have to accept that that is who they are, and we have to make our decisions based on who that person is showing us they are. We cannot take responsibility for that person's choice to be rude or mean or insulting. We're not the one causing the raindrops. We're not the one causing the insults and the disrespect. We have to recognize that those raindrops have nothing to do with us. And no matter how unfair it is, no matter how much trouble you went to set up your campsite or whatever, it doesn't matter. You can't stop that rain. You can't make this person be reasonable. You could also look at this as the inability to control people. As an abuse victim or potential abuse victim, sometimes it's difficult for us to look at what we're doing as trying to control somebody, because we often look at what narcissists do as control, because narcissists do try to control people. But they are doing this in a malicious way usually, or at least in a way that serves them and usually harms the person they're controlling, right? So we often can't see how we are also trying to control somebody when we're just asking them to stop lying all the time or stop getting so angry over nothing. When we're asking for basic reasonable things, we might have better intentions, right? And what we're doing might be more socially acceptable, but it's still trying to control somebody else, trying to change somebody else and not accepting them for who they are. And this alone can keep us stuck in abusive relationships that continue to escalate for years, indefinitely. Until you can accept that this person is who they are and you have no control over how they choose to treat you or how they think you deserve to be talked to. You have no control over how many raindrops are coming down. Until you can accept that, you're going to just sit there and curse at the sky indefinitely, thinking that if you try hard enough, if you beg hard enough, you can somehow stop the rain. You can somehow get this person to just be decent. And it's really hard to accept that you can't do that when all you're asking for is basic decency, but it's true. You cannot force anyone to be somebody they're not. You can't control other people, no matter how reasonable your expectations are. The next thing I want to talk about is understanding your worth. And this is a little harder to explain because I think people, at least speaking for myself, people with the type of self-esteem issues or lack of self-confidence that can make them vulnerable to abusive people or abusive relationships might not see their vulnerability as a lack of self-confidence. I know I didn't perceive myself as somebody with low self-esteem or a low feeling of self-worth. But when I look back, I can see that at least in those relationships, I didn't understand how I deserved to be treated. I thought the way I was being treated was my own fault or what I deserved, and I didn't look at it that way because I was truly convinced that it really was my fault. You need to understand that you are lovable and acceptable just the way you are. Narcissists think that you need to earn their love. You need to earn their acceptance. You need to prove you're good enough every day. You know, you can't just do it once. You have to be constantly proving to them that you're good enough, that you deserve their acceptance and their love. And if this is all you've ever known in relationships, you won't realize how unfair this is. You won't realize that healthy relationships don't work this way. You are good enough just because you are who you are. You deserve love and acceptance. It is not something you need to constantly prove yourself for. It's not something you have to constantly earn. And it's not something that goes away when you make a mistake. So let's say that you're getting ready for a barbecue and your partner, and I want to say this is certainly not always about romantic relationships. This could be work relationships, family relationships, friendships, any kind of relationship. But in this example, let's say your partner stays home and they're going to get the grill ready and the plates ready, whatever, right? And your job is to go to the store and buy the supplies for this barbecue. And when you get home, you realize, because your partner points it out to you, that you bought the wrong kind of chips. And these are the kind of chips that your partner doesn't like. So they're not going to be able to eat these chips. When you are in a relationship, even in the early stages, if this is a relationship that is abusive or is evolving that way, and you have a mindset that is going to allow that to grow, you are either going to be made to feel by your abusive partner, or you're already going to have this internal belief that because you got the kind of chips that your partner doesn't like, it makes you a bad person. A narcissist is going to shame you for something like this and make this bad, like you did a bad thing. And if you become accustomed to these types of relationships, even after you move on to a healthy relationship, it can take a while to kind of undo this conditioning. If you bring the wrong chips home to a healthy partner that loves you, they might be disappointed, but they aren't going to look at you as somebody that doesn't deserve love, that now needs to be punished in a passive-aggressive way or in an aggressive way. Somebody that doesn't care about them, obviously never listens. If this was an honest mistake, a healthy partner is going to look at it that way, and they're not going to take it as a personal insult that you need to pay for now. But if you're used to this type of relationship, this might feel so normal and acceptable that you don't recognize it as a little raindrop, right? You don't recognize it as one of those first signs of an abusive partner. But if you're accustomed to this type of relationship and you come home with the wrong chips and your partner acts like you've done something morally reprehensible and you've hurt them on purpose when it was an honest mistake, you might not recognize that this is a sign of an abusive relationship, abusive dynamics developing. Maybe this isn't a full-blown abusive relationship, but this is a little raindrop that you need to pay attention to, because a healthy partner isn't going to assume that you were trying to hurt them or doing something morally reprehensible because you honestly forgot and got the wrong kind of chips. But if you're conditioned to believe that you deserve to be punished for this, that this is your fault, that the narcissist's feeling that you were trying to hurt them and that you didn't listen and that you don't care about them, if you're conditioned to believe that it's your fault, you're the one that caused those little raindrops, then you're not going to see this as a red flag. You're going to blame yourself. This is something really important to develop if you want to avoid narcissistic and abusive relationships in the future. When you make mistakes, honest mistakes, you still deserve to be loved. You are still acceptable. You are allowed to make mistakes without losing the stability and safety in your relationship. You don't have to be punished and hurt because you made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. And in a healthy relationship, you're not going to have to pay dearly for an honest mistake you made. In a healthy relationship, in this example, you might just feel bad. Like, oh, maybe you'll even run out and go get the right kind of potato chips, but not out of fear. Not because you're afraid and because you need to earn that love back, because now you're unlovable and unacceptable, and now you need to try harder to make it up to him or her, or else you'll never be loved again and it's your fault, you messed up. No, you're going to go out and get the chips because you want your partner to have the chips that they want, right? You're going to do it out of love, not fear. You need to develop a belief and an understanding that when you make honest mistakes, it does not change who you are in the eyes of people who truly love you. Another thing I want to talk about is our ability to make our own decisions without feeling like we have to gain approval from other people. When we become accustomed to narcissistic, abusive relationships, we can be conditioned to believe that something's wrong with our own judgment, that we need approval from other people, validation from other people, that these first little raindrops that we feel, because we don't have a crystal ball to tell us that this definitely is going to become a torrential downpour, we might not have the confidence to make our own decision as to when we feel like we have felt enough raindrops that it's enough for us, we're getting out of here. And we don't need a guarantee that it's going to become a torrential downpour. We have just decided that we have a personal boundary, a personal line where that's enough raindrops for us. We're not taking any more chances with this rainstorm. If you're conditioned to accept abusive behavior and to see it as something that's your own fault, you're going to have a much more difficult time making that call on your own when the very person that's taking advantage of you is telling you that you're wrong, that you're giving up too soon, that it is your fault, that you need to stay and fix it because you're the one causing it. So you feel this need to look for validation and basically permission from the very person who's taking advantage of you. A red flag to look out for that can clue you in as to how bad this problem might or might not be for you is the need that you might have to explain yourself to people. If you feel like you can't make autonomous personal decisions without explaining yourself to other people, and you feel like you need to get approval or you're going to feel like you're doing something wrong, if you're with somebody that takes advantage of this and really buys into this and makes you feel like you need their permission before you can make personal decisions, that's a huge red flag, but it's going to be really hard for you to see it if you really believe that you need their permission to make personal decisions or that there's something flawed about your own judgment. If you don't have the confidence to make a decision and to say, that's enough raindrops for me, you're going to be much more vulnerable and much more likely to fall under the control of a narcissist who's all too willing to tell you what they think about what you should do. You don't owe explanations to other people for your personal decisions. I know this can be kind of a gray area when you're making decisions that directly impact somebody else, but I think that's a little different, and I think you can tell the difference. So some examples I've seen in my own life. I knew a guy, a middle-aged guy with, I think, 5 kids or so, and he was quite wealthy, and he decided to take his family to Hawaii for Christmas. And I happened to be in the same room as this man's father when his father was on the phone with him on Christmas. And the father hung up the phone and got really angry, and I didn't understand why he was upset until he started explaining that he didn't feel like his son had the right to take his family to Hawaii for Christmas. And I was really confused as to why this guy felt like it was his place to decide where his son, his grown son, should take his family for Christmas, but that's beside the point. My point here is that this man, who, in my opinion, was very narcissistic, felt like his son owed him an explanation for taking his family to Hawaii instead of spending it there with him, which is probably why he wanted to go to Hawaii in the first place. But this son recognized and had developed the confidence within himself to ignore that and to simply tell his dad, I'm going to Hawaii, and not to seek permission and not to explain himself, knowing his dad would be upset, but just letting that go and understanding that you are not obligated to explain yourself to people who aren't going to listen or accept your explanations, people that feel like they have more control and say over your life than they really should or do. Then you decide how much control and say they have over your autonomous decisions. One more quick example of this is maybe you have a friend and you just want to go shoe shopping because you need shoes, right? Like, I think in a toxic relationship, some of you might be able to relate to this. If this friend is very controlling or narcissistic or just clingy, I guess, like to a extreme degree, you might know if you go shoe shopping and you don't invite her, she's going to get angry at you later, right? It's not going to be that she's disappointed, like, oh, I needed shoes too. It's going to be like, you went without me. You did that to me. How could you go shoe shopping without me when you know I love shoe shopping, when that's probably why you went without her, because you didn't want her there. But if you have a healthy, confident frame of mind, you will be able, even if it's a little difficult, even if it's a little uncomfortable, you will be able to recognize that you do not owe your friend an explanation. You don't owe your friend an invitation. And if something like that ruins the relationship, then maybe the relationship isn't really worth the cost that it takes to maintain it. This confidence, this kind of confidence that you need to avoid to protect yourself from abusive relationships requires the same kind of self-worth that I was just talking about. Because in order to have this kind of confidence, you have to be willing to let certain relationships go. You have to let go of that control I was talking about. You have to let go of the idea that you can make people be reasonable. You have to accept, like this guy I knew that went to Hawaii, you have to accept that your dad's going to be mad at you. And like the friend that wanted to go shoe shopping with you, you have to accept that if you want to go shoe shopping by yourself, maybe she's not going to want to be your friend anymore. You have to have the autonomy and the confidence and the self-worth to accept that people that can't accept your autonomy, people that can't accept your confidence, might not want to be friends with you anymore or might not want to be in your life anymore. And you have to be okay with that. I think it's really common for people that have repeatedly gotten stuck in abusive relationships to also be people pleasers, to be people that are afraid of other people being mad at them. Speaking for myself, as usual. But I think that if you struggle with this, if you struggle with being really uncomfortable with people being upset with you, you have to learn to recognize the people that are taking advantage of that. Because you can't always just turn it off, right? But if you can recognize the people that are taking advantage of that, people that are trying to control your decisions by plugging into that fear and that discomfort you have at making other people upset, then you can learn to practice letting them be upset. You can learn to practice being okay with risking that type of a relationship and not getting stuck explaining yourself to somebody because you're afraid of losing their love or their acceptance. When you're trying to explain your decisions to somebody else, like maybe if you want to buy a really expensive car, you should explain that or discuss it with your spouse, right? If you have one, right? But it's not quite the same thing. Explaining yourself in a healthy, productive way is just communication, communicating. It's not asking permission for something that is an autonomous decision, something that's a personal decision that's up to you. And it's not doing so in the spirit of fear And it's not putting this decision completely dependent on the approval of somebody else. You are not responsible for the way people feel about your decisions. And your explanation doesn't have to be accepted before you can make a decision for yourself and follow through with it. Narcissists don't love you for who you are. They, quote, love you for what you do for them, how you make them feel about themselves. And if you start making your own decisions and you stop doing everything you can, bending over backwards, trying to win their approval, trying to make them happy, they're not going to like that, and they are going to stop loving you and accepting you for who you are. But in my opinion, it's worth the cost because you don't really have anything there worth it in the first place. And when you can see that and recognize it, you will naturally be able to protect yourself from narcissistic relationships before they get out of hand, before the raindrops turn into a downpour. If you can learn to recognize and trust that your stable, safe relationships will remain intact when you are just being yourself, just because of who you are. You don't need to jump through hoops. You don't need to be constantly chasing a target. And making mistakes is okay. Making honest mistakes shouldn't cost you a relationship overnight. And you are allowed to make autonomous decisions for your own interests. You're allowed to do things that benefit you, even if they might be a little inconvenient or not quite what somebody else is hoping you'll do. You are allowed to do things for yourself. You don't owe explanations to people who won't listen to them and people that don't respect your autonomy. You don't owe explanations to people in exchange for their love and acceptance of you as a human being. Relationships that fall apart because you're not perfect or because you don't devote everything you have to trying to make another person happy are relationships that probably shouldn't be held together in the first place. And I know maybe some of you started this video hoping that I would give you a list of phrases or signs or things to look out for to help you protect yourself from narcissists, to be able to identify what a narcissist is. But nobody can tell you if those raindrops are going to turn into a downpour. The only thing I can tell you is what would have saved me from getting stuck in relationships that took me a lot of effort and cost me a lot to get out of. And I know that if I had just paid attention to those raindrops, if I had known what they were, if I had understood that I had the right to decide that that's one too many raindrops for me, I don't need anyone else's approval. I don't need anybody else to tell me that this is or isn't going to be a downpour, and that it's not my fault if it turns into one, but it is my responsibility to get out of it. If I had understood those things, I would have been able to protect myself far before the cost became what it was. So in my opinion, from my experiences, the key to protecting yourself from abusive relationships with narcissists is to understand that you don't need them in your life. You don't need their approval. You don't need them to validate that you deserve love and acceptance. You don't need to be perfect to deserve love and acceptance. And you don't need anyone in your life that makes you feel like making mistakes is a horrible crime that you deserve to be punished for, that makes you feel like being treated horribly is your fault, and that it's your responsibility to convince somebody else to treat you with basic decency and respect. You have a right to walk away from somebody when you see those first red flags, because every little raindrop means something. Even if it doesn't turn into a downpour, it's up to you to decide when you are going to walk away. I hope this helps. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and comment below any ideas you have for me for future videos. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you like this video and would like to see more like it in the future. Until next time, thanks. Bye.